Welcome to the Empowering Tomorrow's Automotive Software Podcast, brought to you by ETAS, a single source of cutting-edge software and hardware solutions that make automotive embedded systems safe, smart, secure, and sustainable. Each episode, we'll be joined by ETAS and industry experts to discuss how electrification, automation, and connectivity are impacting the automotive industry. Now, sit back and enjoy the discussion.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the ETAS podcast. Today, we are going to have interesting guests for an interesting topic. My name is Ansgar Lindwedel. I'm working for ETAS, heading our team, looking after all of our OSS engagements, so open source engagements in the different communities. And as we are seeing open source becoming a topic in the automotive industry for some years now, and open source communities like the Eclipse SDV working group, but also everything what happens in the Linux Foundation in regards of automotive and other communities are getting more and more important and also more and more busy with members and topics they are working on. Big corporates are looking into how to deal with open source. So what do I need to consider as being set up, being important to be able to either consume open source software, but maybe also contribute to communities. And that's what the topic for today is. And I'm very happy to have some very knowledgeable guests towards that topic with me today. So let me introduce my guest. We have Sarah Novotny. Sarah has been working in the software industry more or less all of her life. Started being a program manager for Kubernetes at Google, then being in the board of directors in the Linux Foundation, Node.js Foundation, and in the end, also the Eclipse Foundation. That's also where we met, Sarah and I, on the board of directors of the Eclipse Foundation. And lastly, Sarah was looking after the open source strategy at Microsoft, heading open source initiatives there attached to the Azure office of the CTO. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Ansgar. I am recently free of Microsoft and my corporate overlords, so I'm here as myself today.
Very happy to have you. And then I managed to set up a guest list of 2 Sarahs, which I'm going to cover by trying to pronounce it in different ways. So on the one hand side, we have the US Sarah Novotny, and then we have Sarah Moser from ZF. And as well, like the other Sarah we have, Sarah also spent her work life in software and open source, started at being the compliance manager at XS Embedded, then project lead for ASIL DORA battery control units at Marquardt, so also some very embedded knowledge on her side, and then project lead and product owner for automotive ECUs, and lastly, in her current role, being the open source compliance officer and agile coach at ZF in Friedrichshafen. And welcome, Sarah. I need to get used to that.
Thank you, Ansgar. Happy to take the chance to speak here.
Yeah, we are happy to have you. And then lastly, a colleague of mine from Bosch, which is Marcel Kurzmann. And Marcel is working also for Bosch and also in open source for a while himself. So part of the open source movement and Bosch from the very beginning, which was around 2015 to 2016. Marcel was more or less, and we're going to talk about that for sure, pulled into this activity and was part of setting up the open source compliance and governance program at Bosch. In his current role, he's an open source officer at Bosch Digital. Welcome, Marcel.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, Ansgar.
Sure. So, as I already mentioned, the automotive industry is figuring out that open source does have some couple of benefits, which also the industry would like to leverage. So, might be easy industry collaboration. So, instead of sitting 1.5 years with lawyers talking about back and foreground IP and how one can collaborate, it's way easier and quicker to get into collaboration if you're doing that in open source. It also speeds up innovation, drives standardization. So many things we are currently, especially under the headline of software-defined vehicles, are looking for. But to be able to participate in open source, there's a couple of things you obviously need to take care about. So stuff like how do you comply to all the open source licenses who are in software you're using or software you're contributing to? How do you deal with your own IP departments in big corporates? How do you make sure that all of these activities fits nicely into each other, and so on. I'd like to ask you, Marcel, tell us about how does that work when we first did that within Bosch. Yeah, how did we go about that?
When we first did that at Bosch, this is a hard question because I think in the beginning only a few people were aware of open source at all, right? And this is also, I think, the main thing where we did heavy progress over the last years, luckily. And also, this is nice to have this podcast also now to make this more mainstream. Yeah, so when we started, I still remember, well, you already mentioned the lawyers, right? So we dragged together everyone who could know something about the topic, as we did not have OpenChain or To-Do Group or communities already that thought, hey, we should help those big corporations to manage this. So this is what we built up. So we needed to do this on our own. And then, yeah, like every big corporation typically does this, PDCA, ISO 9001 thingy. And also there I was involved by being a quality and process manager. Okay, how do I handle this within my quality management system, right? So I need a guideline, I need a process, and that's what we try to figure out. And in the beginning, yeah, we didn't have this vision already to say, okay, one day we want to be a champion. So we had very, very small expectations, right? We mainly wanted to do things right? So to use open source at least in the right way, or not at all. So because the easiest thing is just forbid it, right? But even that is a challenge because, well, you need first the transparency. Do you have this in your products or not? So therefore also we have, I think, this hype that we had a decade ago with these tooling vendors. And yeah, this was the starting point, right? So getting first to know, okay, the transparency, what do we have? Then if we have something, how do we handle it? Gather the experts, and then PDCA, continuously improve cycle by cycle. This is also incremental iterative, so that we finished to be now where we are at now. So I also like here the ETAS manifesto, where you also wrote this in the preamble with those stairs, right? So where we luckily now can look back at when we started we also started there at the low level of these stairs with, okay, just figuring out how to handle this. And if you want to know, well, at Bosch in general, so that I think the audience can also get an idea about how big this is at Bosch. So we have a core team of 12 to 14 people, depends on how you count it, that mainly care about open and inner source in Bosch from holistic side, right? Not only compliance. On top of this, we have a network of open source officers. I think it's around 50 people that only do open source governance, but not 100%. And also, if you climb up that ladder, now we also have open source management representatives, so open source partner networks that are really in the project teams, in the product teams, that also know the context of the projects, of the products, so that they can also give a much better advice on that level. Yeah, and that's the setup. So details were presented, I think, also at the Bitkom, for example, and we're tried also to help others with To-Do Group, with OpenChain, with the guides there. So if you are more interested, please check this out or just contact us. Therefore, we are also in the communities. So, and this is also what I think it's the main thing that you need to understand. You cannot do open source without being open, right? So you ideally do the first step and just coming and join us in the community, ask your questions, and then like the software developers do it, reuse and standing on the shoulders of giants. Yeah.
Yep, but 50 people and handling the governance for the company also means like it doesn't come for free, right? But that's interesting. Thanks for the insights. What I especially like about what you've been describing is that there's a lot of people like you, like people with the same mission in other companies, who even made that process of how do we manage open source governance in open source, like you've been mentioning the OpenChain and To-Do Group initiative, where you're in the meantime also I'd say frequent contributor to what's happening there. So you can also adopt open source without even code yourself. That's also an interesting thing. But before we come maybe back to that, Marcel, and thanks for that, I'd like to ask Sarah, how did you deal with that at ZF? What have been your experiences in setting up ZF for open source?
Thank you for asking the question, Ansgar. If I may, I would like to carve out a bit and talk a bit about the past as well, because I would like to elaborate a bit on what Marcel recently said, starting small. Within the first companies I was working for, we encountered a lot of questions from the developers, from legal, from other stakeholders in the product. And the earlier or later you will start to collect your own best practices. You will start to derive your own work instructions, your own processes, because a couple of things are repetitive. And this was really helpful for us to better understand what does it mean to use open source, what are the risks behind using open source, for example, potential patent infringements or IP issues on other hands. And this was the smallest setup in my past. The next company I was working for was delivering infotainment systems based on Linux and the Yocto built environment. So you can imagine that there was a lot of open source in use. And in this company, already a small team was established to do the open source scans using a software composition analysis tool to find out the exact snippets used in the product. And there the questions arise, hey, how to deal with images, for example, which do not have a clear license assigned. Similar to the questions we will have now in the future. What about AI generated snippets in our codes we're going to embed? And the good thing in this company was many of those questions have been addressed by, for example, having a monthly meeting where the experts of the open source team, the stakeholders, and the board of management of this company sat together and discussed and defined the rules for the entire company. So this was really an open meeting. Everyone was able to join. And a similar approach we took over now in ZF as well. So we have these monthly meetings where the open source program office is presenting what they did in the last 4 weeks or in the last period. And we call out some evaluation phases, for example. We present our processes. So it's really open for everyone in the company to give us feedback, and we take it serious. Due to the fact that we have a certain role assignments in the definition for processes and the rules behind, and certain tools are used, you know it if you worked with quality management systems. We cannot do it purely open source, but we collect the feedback and embed this to our process. Because my personal opinion is you can do a lot of front loading by embedding your compliance activities on the developer's desk and in their tool chain. And there is less effort than to be done in the compliance team. So at the moment, we're quite a small team compared to the Bosch colleagues. We have a team of 6 to 8 people doing code audits, doing the process work, writing the guidelines, and of course, acting as, let's say, consultants to our projects, because we're always part of the projects we're working with. To have an overview about the customer requirements we have, the architectural aspects for which comes into the picture if we speak about dynamic or static linking of libraries, for example, in order to avoid copyleft effects. And this is why we have this deep embedded team and cooperation into our projects, which is really cool and in advance. And I hope we can grow more people in this role in the future.
And we already figured out that this team is working well. Little fun fact for our guests. So since ETAS is also a supplier of ZF, we already got informed that there was some kind of missing documentation on our tools where we are open source users. And we already worked that out. So it seems like that team is working good.
And the cooperation was really smooth. So thank you for that.
Nice.
This is the best part of open source, is we can work across all of our boundaries of our corporate framing.
Absolutely, yep. So thanks, Sarah. And then coming to maybe the US, Sarah, if you look at it maybe from your, I would call it non-automotive branded or primed perspective you're having. What is similar? What is maybe also different if you look at it from how corporates deal with open source? And especially from your experience from the past, where I'd say the IT industry was an earlier adopter of open source than the automotive industry maybe is. What is it you would recommend to do, not to do? And maybe also what kind of good and successful patterns we can also translate into the automotive industry?
Oh, I'd be happy to. And I think, Ansgar, you hit the nail on the head here. You said, from the software and technology business as opposed to a business which grew up not in software and technology, when businesses that grew up as manufacturing businesses or automotive businesses. Our software businesses are a little bit further along the road that Marcel and then Zara also described. And we have helped, of course, build in collaboration with our peer group some of these tools that have been discussed. So OpenChain and the To-Do group were two things that both Microsoft and Google were in different ways, very heavily invested in making this sort of practice more codified and more clear, given that we started along this road in technology a few years earlier than you all did. But one of the things that Zara mentioned was software composition analysis. And that is the model when you don't quite know what you're getting into your company and you're accepting a piece of software that may or may not have an SBOM attached to it, explaining what is in this software. It may or may not be needing license compliance and have to go back to your ETOS friends and say, could you share this license with us? And so software composition analysis is very much the after effect. Like, I get a piece of software, I don't know what's in it. And it's an incredible tool, and we've used it in the industry for 15, 20 plus years. Now we're trying to shift all of that left in the tooling by working with software bills of materials, SBOMs, and working with tooling that Marcel mentioned and Zara mentioned, moving that tooling into our build pipelines for our existing teams to make sure that they are bringing in a relatively light, we hope, lift around license compliance, understanding the tooling that they're making use of, understanding the dependencies they're bringing in, and then understanding how they will have to manage and engage with those dependencies long term. Because while open source is free, it's not free like sunshine. It's free like a puppy. So you bring your open source home from the park, and it's really cute, and it's going to help you do all of these amazing things, but you're still going to have to feed it. You're still going to have to work with security audits. You're still going to have to understand that if that open source developer who may have published this with absolutely no liability and free to use, free to distribute, all of the nice things about the open source licenses, if that developer doesn't help when there maybe becomes a flaw, that is on you. And we see that 96% of commercial software today has some amount of open source in it. And that means that when we package, we as software developers, we as automotive developers, as developers in the industry, when we package software, we have to take that responsibility and that accountability for our end customers. And that's the work that has to be, that is being done underneath all of the covers of license compliance and management of dependencies and understanding of software composition, either through late stage analysis or by collecting the data up front for our newly required, newly encouraged software bills of materials. So I loved hearing that Marcel has a core group of people and then many, many satellite groups that are responsible within their own expertise spaces, or at least that's how I interpreted what you said, Marcel. Because that means that we're moving this, again, left toward just being a portion of software development as opposed to being this specialty weird space that requires, a fleet of lawyers and a 6-month conversation. So we're making this, again, easier and easier from, private collaboration to public collaboration, which is all a little scary when we all started using open source. But now, 20 years on, 30 years on, we're starting to get the hang of it, understanding where the guardrails are, where we need our teams to pay extra special attention, and then where we can change it for the better these days. There's so much in open source happening, and this is happening across both the technology industry in and of itself and all of the industries that are finding technology as a differentiator at this point, software as a differentiator. So I'm super excited about it, and I love hearing the more industry vertical definitions and engagement with open source.
Yep, I love that sunshine and puppy picture you were drawing.
Yep.
That's definitely true. And having a dog myself, I feel you. What would be interesting to understand is hearing also some numbers from Sarah and Marcel about how many people it take to handle that. Do you have an estimate how much people Google or Microsoft run to handle open source governance, to just give an impression to the folks?
They are larger numbers, and they are very differently configured. As I said, we're trying to shift all of this effort left in a way that allows it to be much more a product of software development. So we need fewer specialized skills in this. But Microsoft and Google both have an open source programs office. They both invest heavily in open source projects, both projects that they create and produce, but then also in projects that they have large scale dependencies on. And so it's a harder comparison because, for example, you have within Microsoft, as a great example, you have a upstream engineering team that focuses on the software in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation as needed by the the AKS product group. So you have these pockets of deep skill in particular areas that are different from the centralized pieces. We also have, at least in Microsoft most recently, again, Google's a little bit further out of date, so I wouldn't want to give numbers. Within Microsoft, we also have a legal group that focuses and specializes on open source within, as a subspecialty, the IP and patent group. So it's been a little bit weird on that journey to make sure that it moves and it still engages with open source in a modern and forward-looking way, and yet the fact that it exists under the IP and patent group at this point makes it such that you can see how they play well together. We have enough history with open source that fewer lawyers are scared.
And if I just wanted to mention, if I recall my pictures of Steve Ballmer having hate speeches on open source, I don't know, 15 years back, I bet there's a couple of corporate lawyers within Microsoft who needed to become convinced of that, right?
It was a long path for sure.
Yeah.
But that said, open source is part of the culture right now. And that's why I say we're trying to shift it left. It's no longer trying to be a specialty, but it's trying to become part of the good software development lifecycle program that exists. And this is just a compositional piece of it, to understand what your open source dependencies are, not treat them in a way that is, other based, but instead to just understand it as, the same way you would evaluate any dependency risk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Interesting. So maybe to wrap that first part up a little bit, what I understood, and I think this is also the encouraging message to the audience, you don't need to start with 50 or hundreds of people doing that. You can start small. You start from a very specific point where you would like to engage in open source, even if it is consuming open source in the first step. And you can grow that from there. I heard that there's a lot communities also focusing on the content of how to manage open source and open source governance. So we heard about the Open Chain Initiative, the To-Do group, where you can simply go and join discussions and get your head around what to do and what steps you need to take. Another question which I'd like to put to whoever would like to take it is there anything on your path of managing open source and open source governance where you'd say like, oh, if I do that a second time, I would probably do it a little different because that really didn't work so well?
Defining workflows without taking feedback serious. Because no one is going to support you on a compliance journey if they haven't been part of the definition phase.
Oh, yeah, I feel that for sure.
I'll throw one in, which is figuring out better ways to reward people for evaluating the risk, the concern, the challenge. Make sure that this isn't just compliance, but make sure that there's a way that people are rewarded for the conversation about software dependencies. Right now, that's not something that's rewarded. It's sort of a must go through this tick box. And we've tried a couple of ways, and so far none of them have really panned out. I've tried them in a couple of places, so I won't be specific, but none of them have really panned out yet. But we really need to find a way to properly reward the moment that someone says, no, we really need to take a second look at this, even if it means something is delayed.
Yeah, interesting one. So actually, my next question obviously would have been, what's an example? But got
Yeah.
your point.
Marcel might have an example of something entirely different. How about we move that way?
I have hundreds of examples, but I think the not here. But I think what I imagined looking back is that we started in a bubble, right? And I think this is what I would not repeat, especially as now we have also those communities that if I can make an advice to other companies starting now, organizations, I think don't stay in your bubble. Yeah, it's as I also showed it in one of my talks. This is not a differentiating thing, right? Doing a hygiene, right, in the open source compliance all through the supply chain. This should be something that everyone should profit, and not, hey, the one is doing it better than the other. So, but if we have the supply chain for software, ideally everyone does it the same way and with a high maturity. And so please reach out to the existing people. You're welcome, right? So we also, I appreciate, I became a real open source enthusiast by eating the own dog food, right? By really doing it the same way. And I think this is also helpful to also understand what your developers suffer, right? In getting out contributions, in needing to read all your guidances, going through those processes, so that if you feel this pain yourself, I think you're in a much better position also to make that, shape that in a way that it's not really fun, but yeah, at least it's not the opposite.
And if I can maybe add to what all of you have been saying, what my advice, also my own learning is in that journey is, take your time and visit events in the open source communities which are relevant to your topic. It's not mandatory that you need to be a software engineer to join open source events. So when OpenChain or To-Do Group is meeting in their events, you will find a lot of people who are trying to get their head around and manage their open source governance and compliance. And that's so much fun on the one hand side, and you learn way quicker when exchanging with others who are tackling the same problems than you try to tackle. As soon as you get your feet out of your own company, it gets more fun and also quicker, and a quicker learning journey from my point of view.
That's
Nice. You're touching on my favorite parts, the community.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to talk for community, and I bet we can maybe make an own episode on that, because my claim always is that open source is only, I'd say, 30% on technology and the other 70% on people. And often we forget about the people. And that's maybe a closing question I'd like to forward to you, Sarah. Having that experience of establishing an open source community with Kubernetes, which from my point of view, one can say is quite successful, and is something which happened between competitors. So maybe if you look at that journey, how you've been also contributing and managing that this Kubernetes community is there and is working on what Kubernetes is doing, transforming that to what the automotive industry is doing. And obviously, maybe we don't build Kubernetes in cars, but still it's about abstraction and middleware kind of topics, even though that's not in the cloud space. What is it you would try to learn from what the tech industry was undergoing and what the automotive industry can maybe adopt from there?
Bringing the community together on non-differentiating software gets you such a better experience and a better product long term than presuming that you, within the four walls of your company, have the best possible engineers able to answer every question that might happen around the thing you're trying to work on. There's an engineering economics that happens when you recognize that your competitors and your customers also have some of the top 1% of developers across the world, and you will never be able to hire all of that top 1% of developers across the world. So why not work together with them in the public in a way that promotes healthy, constructive debate, collaboration, technological solutions that are actually innovative for the needs of the whole industry. Now, it's not perfect for every problem, and it's not perfect that it will always work across every piece of the industry. But with large verticals like automotive, there is an enormous amount of skill across the multiple vendors in that space, which, if brought together, could make even better software as the platform that you all differentiate upon in the top level. That platform will be better for all of the companies at somewhat lower cost to each of the companies, and will provide a more consistent experience to consumers of all of these products. So that engineering economics, that collaborative skill tapping across the different companies, all of that work actually makes a better long-term stable product if we can find the right ways to align our incentives. Now, I come naively into the open source space for automotive because I don't understand the software liability structure as much that you have, or the liability structure around how the different companies and partners within the ecosystem work. So I come at it a little more naively, but that's why I can bring the experience from software and say, so how can we make this work for your vertical? What are the constraints in this organization or in this industry? And that really will allow that cross-company conversation will allow for such a better end product if we can find a way to line up the incentives for the individuals, the companies, and then get that best product from the consumer.
Oh, thanks.
I don't know if there's something specific you want to dive into in that.
Oh, I have 20 follow-up questions, but I think that would kind of explode the format of this one episode. But maybe we figure out some interesting topics for further episodes. So also asking the audience, let us know in the comments what kind of topics you would like to discuss maybe with these guests, and we figure out if we make a follow-up kind of episode on it. I'd say for today, I'd like to wrap it up saying, like, what I learned from the discussion is that you can start small. You don't need to think big. There's a lot of things which communities is already working on. You can go and join these communities and learn from these communities. And there's also a lot of things open source will enable you once you have that governance topic sorted out. And we've been starting a little bit talking about community building and what the power of the community then can be. I'd say there's topics for further detailing them in another episode maybe. But for today, I say thank you to my three guests, to Sarah, Sarah, and Marcel. Super humbled that you've been part of that episode. And thereby saying thank you and listen and hear you next time then.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Empowering Tomorrow's Automotive Software podcast. Please leave a comment or review with your feedback or what you'd like to hear in future episodes. To learn more about automotive embedded systems and ETAS's capabilities, visit our website at ETAS. That's ETAS.com.